You can't just stroll in here. Laundry is for residents only. I don't know you.
I am a resident. Apartment 3B. Been here 2 years. My code opened the door.
Sure you do. You need to prove you live
I
here.
don't have to prove anything to you. Move. I live.
The basement smelled faintly of detergent and damp concrete. Naya Hayes carried a large laundry basket, her arms already straining under the weight of clothes piled high. She pressed the key code into the keypad, and the heavy metal door clicked open. Relief washed over her. Finally, she could do her laundry without dragging it up and down stairs, and finally get a little sense of normalcy after a week of 16-hour shifts at the hospital. Then she saw her. Julia Cross, standing like a human barricade in front of the washing machines, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You can't just stroll in here," Julia said, her tone commanding, almost military. "This isn't for visitors. Laundry is for residents only. There's a sign right there." Naya froze, unsure if she'd misread the situation. She tilted the basket, trying to fit her body through the narrow space. "I'm not a visitor. Apartment 3B. I live here. My code opens the door, same as yours." Julia's eyes narrowed. Sure you do." Nia's hands tightened on the basket. She felt the exhaustion she carried from work and from life settle heavier in her chest. "Been here 2 years. I pay rent. I get emails from management. I'm just trying to wash my clothes." Julia stepped closer, her posture accusatory. "How did you get the code?" "Codes aren't just given out to anyone. Maybe someone shared it with you. Maybe you got it off the internet. You can't just pretend to live here." The words hit Naya like a slap. Pretend. She had worked 80-hour weeks, survived sleepless nights, and yet here she was being treated as a criminal in her own building. She lowered the basket, planting it on the concrete floor, and squared her shoulders. "I live here. I don't need your permission. I've been here longer than you." Julia's face flushed red, but she didn't step back. "I'm just protecting the building. You're not supposed to be here. I have a right to question anyone I don't recognize." Nia's eyes narrowed. She took a step forward, just enough to be eye to eye. "So, if I were someone else, you'd treat me the same. You'd block me from doing something I have every right to do." Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Rules are rules. You shouldn't take it personally." "It's personal because it's my home," Nia said quietly, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "You're questioning me because of what I look like, and that's not about rules. That's about you thinking I don't belong here." Julia's jaw tightened, and she glanced toward the machines like she was about to make a move. Nia's chest thumped painfully. She wasn't just tired, she was furious. She had faced discrimination before, but never in her own home, never by someone she'd never met. Someone who thought a black woman entering a laundry room was suspicious by default. "Do you really think I care about your excuses?" Julia said sharply. "I see someone who shouldn't be here, and I'm doing my job." "I'm doing mine," Naya shot back, her voice louder, trembling with emotion. "I work at the hospital, I save lives, and I pay rent here. But right now, you're trying to treat me like a criminal in my own building. Do you know what that feels like?" The words seemed to hang in the air. Julia's eyes darted away, then back, and she gestured vaguely at the laminated sign on the wall. "Look, there's a rule. Residents only." Naya stepped aside from the basket and fixed Julia with a stare she had used in the operating room when lives were on the line. "And I'm a resident. I don't need you to decide who belongs here. I don't need you to decide if I can wash my clothes. This is my space too." Julia's phone appeared in her hand. "Fine. I'll call the manager. Or the cops. I'll get someone to verify you. You don't get to just assume you can walk in here." Nia's heart sank. She had avoided confrontation for 2 years in this building, kept to herself, and stayed invisible, and now she was forced into it. Her throat felt tight, but she kept her voice steady. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll wait. But know this. I'm not going anywhere. I have every right to be here." For a moment, the room was quiet, just the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere behind the walls. Nia's hands rested on the edge of the laundry basket. She tried to calm her racing mind, to focus on the mundane act of folding clothes, of keeping herself composed. Then the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Both women turned sharply. The basement door opened, and the superintendent walked in, toolbox in hand. A man in his late 50s, familiar with the building and its residents, paused, taking in the scene, the tense standoff, the basket of clothes, and the flushed, rigid faces. Julia immediately turned to him, pointing at Nia. "This woman, she claims she lives here, but I've never seen her before. I think she's trespassing. Shouldn't you know about this?" The superintendent looked from Julia to Nia, then smiled warmly at Nia. "Good to see you, Dr. Hayes. How's the hospital treating you?" Nia's shoulders dropped slightly. Relief and validation collided in her chest. "Exhausting as always," she said quietly, managing a small, tired smile. The superintendent turned back to Julia, his voice calm but firm. "Dr. Hayes has been a resident here since 2021. She has every right to use the laundry room. You, Mrs. Cross, moved in 6 months ago. Let her through." Julia's face went pale, blotchy red patches spreading over her cheeks and neck. She opened her mouth, then closed it several times, searching for words that wouldn't come. Her body seemed to shrink under the weight of reality. The superintendent stepped aside, gesturing for Nia to move. Nia picked up her basket without a word and approached the machines, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline, but her mind focused on the task in front of her. She loaded the washer, measured detergent, and started the cycle. Julia grabbed her folded towels and fled, leaving the room silent except for the hum of the machines. The superintendent lingered, toolbox still in hand. He leaned slightly toward Nia. "I'll speak to management about this. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of harassment here." Nia nodded, grateful but drained. She stood there a moment longer, letting the weight of everything sink in. The confrontation, the microaggressions she had endured countless times before, the validation from authority, and the relief of finally being acknowledged. The hum of the washing machines echoed through the basement, but Nia Hayes could barely hear it. Her mind replayed the confrontation on a loop. She had been forced to defend her existence in her own home. She had been questioned, doubted, and blocked by someone who had no right to decide who belonged there. And yet, she had won this round. The superintendent had confirmed her residency, and Julia Cross had backed down. But something about the encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. She leaned against the counter, waiting for the machines to fill with water, and tried to focus on something ordinary, like folding towels or sorting socks. The rhythmic sound of laundry became a temporary anchor, a way to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But then she heard it. The squeak of footsteps approaching fast from the hallway. Nia's heart skipped a beat. She glanced up. Julia Cross was back, her expression even more determined, almost desperate. "I don't think you understand," Julia said, her voice sharp but slightly trembling. "I saw you come in. I saw the code. But that doesn't mean I can't report suspicious activity. I'm just trying to keep this building safe. Anyone would have done the same." Nia straightened, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She could feel every muscle tense, ready for another confrontation. "You're harassing me. You've been questioning me, accusing me, and making me prove that I live here. This isn't about safety. It's about you deciding who belongs in this building. And it stops now." Julia's face flushed with indignation. "I have every right. You think you're the only one who matters here. Just because you pay rent doesn't mean you can ignore the rules." "The rules don't say you get to play judge and jury," Nia said. Her voice rose slightly, a controlled anger that made Julia flinch. "You can't decide who belongs here. You can't decide if I can do my laundry. That's it. End of discussion." Julia's eyes narrowed, and she whipped out her phone. I'll call the police if I have to. We'll see who's right. Maybe they'll tell me I was wrong. Maybe not. You don't get to intimidate me. Nia's stomach dropped. She didn't want the police involved, but at this point, she knew there was no other way to assert her rights. Fine, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her body. Call them. I'm not going anywhere. I've done nothing wrong. I have every right to be here. The basement door creaked open again. Nia's heart leaped. But this time, it wasn't the superintendent. It was Officer Daniel Reed responding to Julia's call. He was in uniform, a tall man with a calm, professional demeanor. He raised his hand slightly, signaling both women to pause. All right, Officer Reed said, his voice firm but neutral. I need both of you to take a step back and explain what's happening. Julia immediately launched into her explanation, pointing at Nia. This woman came into the laundry room. She claims she lives here, but I've never seen her before. She used the code, but how do I know she actually lives here? It could be anyone. I'm just trying to keep the building safe. Officer Reed turned to Nia, his gaze steady. Ma'am, can you tell me your side? Nia took a deep breath. I live in apartment 3B. I've lived here for 2 years. I work 80-hour weeks as a surgical resident. I pay rent. I follow the rules. I use the laundry room like any other resident. And I've been harassed and blocked by this woman for no reason other than her assuming I don't belong here because of how I look. The officer's eyes flicked toward Julia, then back at Nia. Do you have any proof of residency? Nia pulled her apartment key fob from her pocket. This opens my apartment door. I have emails from management confirming my residency, and the superintendent knows me personally. I've never had any issues until today. Officer Reed nodded slowly. He pulled out his notebook. All right. I'll need to confirm with the superintendent and management, but from what I hear right now, you've done nothing wrong. You have every right to be here. Julia's face went pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone. But she used the code. I saw it myself. I'm just doing my duty. Officer Reed's expression was calm but firm. Mrs. Cross, the fact that someone uses a code doesn't make them a trespasser. And accusing someone of being a criminal in their own building without evidence is harassment. You need to step back and let her do her laundry. That's the law. Julia stammered, her voice cracking. I didn't mean. I was concerned. Officer Reed shook his head slightly. Concerned is one thing. Harassment is another. Right now, you're harassing a resident. Step aside. Let her finish what she came here to do. Julia's shoulders slumped. She stepped back, her face burning with embarrassment. Nia picked up her basket and moved to the washing machines, starting a load. The officer remained for a moment, observing quietly, then stepped out to make a phone call to management to confirm Nia's residency formally. The confirmation came within minutes. Management verified that Nia had lived in the building for 2 years, paid rent on time, and had every right to use the laundry facilities. Officer Reed gave Julia a stern warning. Any further harassment could result in legal action or eviction proceedings. Julia muttered something under her breath, but said nothing else. Nia returned to her laundry, her hands shaking slightly as she loaded clothes into the machine. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by exhaustion. She felt the weight of weeks of long shifts, sleepless nights, and constant microaggressions settle heavily on her shoulders. But this time, there was relief too. She had asserted her rights. She had stood up for herself. She had been validated. After the machines were running, Nia leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment. The basement was quiet, except for the whirring of the machines. She thought about the countless times she had been questioned in public, followed in stores, or assumed guilty simply for existing. And she realized that her own building, her home, had been no different, until she refused to be intimidated. Hours later, after the laundry was done and the machines emptied, Neo went to the management office on the first floor. She filed a formal harassment complaint against Julia Cross, detailing the blocking, accusations, and racial profiling she had faced. The property manager listened carefully, taking notes, and assured Nia that the matter would be taken seriously. Within 48 hours, Julia received a lease violation notice. It cited Nia's complaint, documented the harassment, and warned that any further incidents would result in immediate lease termination. Emails from Julia claiming misunderstanding fell flat. Security camera footage showed her aggressive stance, the finger pointing, and her ultimate retreat when the superintendent intervened. There was no ambiguity about the events. Word spread quickly among the residents. Others who had experienced Julia's self-appointed patrols came forward with similar stories. It became clear that Neo was not the first person she had harassed, just the first to take formal action. The building management ensured consequences were applied, and Julia's behavior shifted noticeably afterward. For Nia, the experience was validating but exhausting. She continued her brutal work schedule, returned home to her apartment late at night, and did her laundry without obstruction. But she remained more cautious, aware of the subtle judgments around her. The building felt the same, yet different. She was no longer invisible, and that both empowered and exhausted her. The incident left a mark, not just on Nia, but on the building as a community. It became a cautionary tale about assumptions, prejudice, and the harm caused by someone trying to police spaces that weren't theirs. Nia's victory was small but significant, a rare assertion of rights in a world where people of color are constantly questioned about their legitimacy. The sun had already set when Nia Hayes returned to her apartment. Her laundry was folded and put away, but the events of the day lingered in her mind like a weight she couldn't shake. She sank into her couch, exhausted physically from her shifts at the hospital and mentally from the confrontation she'd endured. She had faced harassment before in stores and public spaces, but never in her own building. And yet, she had stood her ground. She had been recognized and validated by authority, but the feeling of violation still lingered. The next morning, Nia went to the building's management office to follow up on her complaint. The manager greeted her warmly, offering reassurance that action had been taken. "We've issued a formal notice to Mrs. Cross," he said. "She's been reminded of the building's policies, and any further harassment will result in lease termination." Nia nodded, her expression neutral, but her thoughts swirling. She knew that a letter could not undo the stress, the indignity, or the repeated moments she had been forced to justify her existence. But at least there was acknowledgement. At least there was accountability. Later that week, she saw Julia Cross in the hallway. Julia's posture was defeated. She avoided eye contact and walked quickly past Nia, clutching her phone as if it were a shield. The once confident self-appointed protector of the building had been reduced to a cautious shadow of herself. Residents who had witnessed Julia's behavior breathed a quiet sigh of relief. No one spoke to her. No one invited confrontation. For Nia, the day-to-day rhythm of life returned slowly. She continued her surgical residency, worked long, punishing hours, and slept in short, broken stretches. She continued to enter her building late at night, groceries in hand, laundry basket ready, and never again had to justify herself in that laundry room. And yet, she remained aware of the subtle judgments that existed everywhere, on the bus, in the supermarket, in neighborhoods she walked through. The encounter with Julia was just one example of a broader pattern of assumptions and racial profiling. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Nia returned home to find the superintendent waiting in the lobby. He smiled warmly. "Everything settled with Mrs. Cross?" he asked. Nia nodded. "Yes, it's over officially." He looked thoughtful. "You know, it's not always like this. Most people in your position wouldn't get acknowledgement. They'd just have to endure it. You were lucky in a sense, but it shouldn't take luck for someone to be recognized in their own home." She nodded silently. His words echoed the unfairness she felt, the reality that standing up and being validated was rare. Most people would quietly bear harassment and racial profiling, silently weighed down by the assumptions of others. Months passed. Julia eventually moved out when her lease ended. No one mourned her departure. The building returned to its typical rhythm. Quiet hallways, anonymous neighbors, life moving at its steady, mundane pace. But the memory of that Tuesday afternoon in the basement laundry room lingered for Nia. It was a reminder of how quickly an entitled individual could turn suspicion into harassment and how easily a person could be judged based solely on appearance. One afternoon, Nia was invited to speak at a local seminar on racial profiling and microaggressions in urban housing. She recounted her experience in the laundry room in front of a room of professionals and students. She described Julia blocking her entrance, demanding proof, questioning her presence, and threatening to involve police unnecessarily. She described the fear, the exhaustion, and the indignity. And she described the validation, the superintendent stepping in, confirming her residency, and the management enforcing consequences. Her story resonated with many. Others shared their own experiences of being harassed or questioned in spaces where they had every right to be. Nia realized that what had happened in that laundry room was not unique. It was one incident in a nationwide pattern of racial bias, where Black residents and other people of color are often forced to prove their legitimacy repeatedly. Back in her apartment that evening, Nia reflected on how much courage it had taken to stand firm. Her adrenaline still lingered from the confrontation, even months later. She realized that standing up for herself had not only protected her rights, but also opened the door for others in her building who had experienced similar harassment. People had started speaking up. Management had become more attentive. Julia Cross had been held accountable. The power dynamics, small though they might have seemed, had shifted. Yet, there was a quiet melancholy in Nia's victory. The confrontation reminded her that even in spaces she should feel safe, she could be questioned, doubted, and profiled. She understood now that invisibility, once a comfort in her busy life, could also be a vulnerability. People assumed she was less than she was, overlooked her presence, and judged her instantly without knowing her. The validation she received from authority had corrected the injustice in that moment, but the undercurrent of prejudice remained in the world outside her apartment. A year later, Nia walked past the basement laundry room, her laundry basket in hand. She paused, remembering the tension, the confrontation, the fear, and the anger. She smiled faintly, not because it had been easy, but because she had endured. She had not allowed herself to be erased or silenced. She had demanded recognition of her rights, and she had received it. In the months following the incident, Julia's actions became a cautionary tale within the building. New residents were reminded to respect neighbors and follow rules without harassing or profiling others. Nia's story, though personal, became part of the shared consciousness of the building's community, a silent reminder that entitlement and assumptions could harm others, and accountability must be enforced to maintain fairness. Nia Hayes never forgot that Tuesday in the laundry room. She carried the memory not just as a scar, but as a lesson, the importance of standing up for herself, the courage it takes to assert her rights, and the resilience required to face prejudice in spaces where she should feel safe. And every time she entered that laundry room, now calm and unblocked, she felt the quiet strength of knowing that she belonged exactly where she was. She had faced intimidation, confrontation, and assumptions of illegitimacy. She had been questioned for existing in her own home. And yet, she emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. The superintendent had acknowledged her presence. Management had supported her. And Julia Cross had learned, painfully, that assumptions could not override reality. The story of Nia Hayes in that Chicago apartment building's laundry room became more than an isolated incident. It was a lesson about the impact of racial profiling, the cost of entitlement, and the necessity of standing firm in spaces you have every right to occupy. It was a story about resilience, recognition, and the quiet victories that often go unnoticed but carry immense meaning for those who experience them firsthand. For Nia, life continued. Grueling hospital shifts, sleepless nights, quiet mornings, and routine laundry cycles. But the memory of the confrontation remained a defining moment, a reminder of courage in the face of intimidation, a testament to dignity, and a story she would carry for life.